Welcome to the ADNA Presents, the Audio Description Network Alliance. This is Roy Samuelson. Today we have a very special guest returning. This is Stephanae McCoy. She is the founder of Bold Blind Beauty. Thanks so much for joining us, Steph.
Thanks for having me again, Roy. It's always a joy being here with you.
Oh, I could hear the smile through the airwaves. I'm reading the website boldblindbeauty.com mission statement. Bold Blind Beauty's mission is to improve humanity by changing the way we perceive one another. It's such a simple and elegant statement, and it's so clear. I can only imagine the months and years that it took to find the perfect words to put that together. Could we talk a little bit of as much or as little as you'd like to share about where Bold Blind Beauty came from?
Sure. Bold Blind Beauty came out of my personal desire to help people to understand what blindness is, what it looks like, how it presents itself. And it actually, when I first thought about it, that was sort of the idea, because what I had noticed, especially as my sight declined and I had to begin using the white cane, so many people I would come across during my workday. I worked downtown Pittsburgh, and occasionally I would go out, like during lunch or whatever. And I was always dressed well. I wore heels, makeup, the whole nine, and I used the white cane. And people would stare. Some people would make loud comments. I mean, they weren't really rude. It was just that they couldn't understand why, because I look like I can see. However, they couldn't understand why the white cane. And if I couldn't see, how is it then that I could look, in their opinion, so presentable? And it just, I felt I felt uncomfortable in my skin. Being a newly blind person, and it took me a while to embrace the word blind. I did it intentionally because for me, it was a whole mind shift. Um, so, you know, there was a lot of different reasons sort of why I created Bold Blind Beauty, but that was I think one of the main ones. Um and this whole idea behind beauty and being a person who has experienced sight loss or someone who is totally blind, many people think that when you can't see, you don't care about your appearance. And um it's just so untrue. I had
Mm.
talked to a group of totally blind women, and they wanted to know um, how to apply makeup and different makeup techniques. And they asked a lot of questions. And that was another reason I'm like, well, here we are having this discussion, and these women want to know this. And why isn't somebody addressing this issue? So I thought, well, why don't I do it?
There we go.
So those are some of the reasons.
Mm. I'm thinking about the implication of blind people wearing makeup. On our podcast, we talk a lot about audio description and blind people watching movies, blind people watch TV shows. That I'm thinking about all of the parallels here, and I'm struggling to ask the question. But I think the question that I'm coming up to is why it matters. Something as strangely obvious as learning how to put on makeup and the implications of what that means for the individual who is blind, as well as the people who are learning about Bold Blind Beauty, the website itself, and your efforts within not just the website but Bold Blind Beauty.
Yeah, because it is a little complex, but for me, it boils down to this, and it's one of the reasons why the mission is about improving humanity by changing the way we perceive one another. Perceptions. Our perceptions are just that, perceptions. And really, when you think about it, they don't really mean much if we don't know the individuals that we're perceiving. When we give ourselves time to learn about people, and not just blind people, not just sighted people, not just people with any other kinds of disabilities, but just people, a person, an individual. Not even saying, a group of people, because all of us, when it gets right down to it, are individuals and each of us are unique. So when people wonder, well, how can a blind person wear or even want to wear makeup? How can they dress nice or even want to dress nice? How can they watch TV and movies? How can they appreciate entertainment or sports or anything that anybody else does? For me, it boils down to this: we are human. All of us are human. And I wish that we lived in a world where it wasn't we versus them or us versus we.
Mm.
It should be plain and simple, just us. But as humans, we're complex. So we tend to make everything in our world complex, relationships and everything, and how we interact with one another and how we view other people. And I think a lot of it comes from our own lived experience. If you've never experienced blindness, you're going to have a viewpoint about it that is skewed. How
Mm.
do I know this? This is going to be a little off topic, but I hope you
Bring
don't
it.
mind. Just bear
Oh,
with
not at
me.
all.
Just bear with me.
Yes.
I recently lost my mother. And so I got a quote yesterday from this organization I signed up with on grief and dealing with grief. And it was talking about how friends and people will try to be understanding. They'll ask you how you're doing, and you say fine, but inside your head you're wanting to scream, I'm not fine, this is not cool. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's not, and it feels, you feel isolated and lonely and all these different things. But to the outside world, from my perspective looking out, people are still enjoying life. Kids are playing, adults are having fun, they're going to the park, to the museum, whatever, they're doing all these wonderful things. But yet somebody who is grieving is struggling. So everybody is going to experience that at some point during their life. But if you haven't yet experienced it, you're not going to know what that is like. And the same can be said for
Mm.
blindness. The same could be said for someone who has experienced an amputation, or somebody who was born with a disability. You don't know what that experience is like unless you yourself have experienced it. But that's when compassion and empathy and some of these other things come into play. And so, what we have to do in order to try to grasp that, it's not necessary, I don't think, for us to understand. I think what's necessary is for us to believe the individual who is sharing the story about their experience.
Mm. It's so beautiful. I'm thinking about that compassion and empathy in the context of the phrase that you introduced to me, blindness on the spectrum. That it's a blindness is a spectrum. It's not uh, off and on, totally blind or
Totally sighted.
totally
Yeah.
sighted. There's that spectrum allows for that individualism, that varying thing, and it seems like it's deconstructing a lot of the stereotypes too. That language means so much, and it
Yes.
seems to tie in very well with what you just shared about. I'm so sorry for the loss of your mother, and
Oh, thank you.
um, um,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it is a spectrum. But then when you think about it, almost any experience that most of us are going through in our life is a spectrum. And not one of us, not no two people who have the same shared experience are going to experience the exact same way. It's
Mm,
going to be different. And I think that's why we have to allow some grace as well, because I think about people who are awesome advocates, and yet sometimes I think what we forget is that, especially for people like me who have lost sight later in life, that we were there, we were once sighted. So we when we were sighted, we ourselves couldn't understand what it was like to be blind or what it was like to live with limited sight. So then to become an advocate and to say to sighted people, stop doing this, stop doing that, this is wrong, that's wrong. How can we do that? Shame other people when we ourselves were doing the exact same thing. And really what it boils down to is bias, right? We all have
Mm.
our biases. But again, I think it's a learning and growing thing, and we can all strive to do better, just like with the work that you do in audio description and how you're trying to create a world where um, this type of entertainment that we are taking in is accessible for all of us. I had a recent experience where I was watching a movie with my son. He recently got me this really huge TV. But I have AD on Netflix. So for any movies that are playing on my TV or any of my devices, but especially my TV when other people are here, they're going to hear the audio description. So he and I were watching this movie, The Mother, with Jennifer Lopez. And it was a really good movie, at least I thought it was. But what I noticed was there were very long, like spaces where action was happening. And thankfully, there was AD. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known what was happening. But my son noticed that. He said it at the end of the movie. He said, it is such a good thing that this movie has audio description. He said, because otherwise, how would anybody who has, that's on the blindness spectrum understand what's happening? How would they be able to keep up with the film? And I thought that that was pretty powerful coming from someone who's sighted and could
Mm.
appreciate watching the movie.
Yeah. And being able to hear his perspective on that, it just ties back into what you had said about the perception, that his perception changed simply by that experience, that he grew and he learned something. And I can see how this ties back into the overall, the value, the mission, and vision that Bold Blind Beauty has. I think this is a fair comparison to audio description and the work that you've been doing and putting out there through Bold Blind Beauty. Can you talk a little bit about some of the more impactful experiences and the direction that you're taking Bold Blind Beauty along that line, as far as getting that message out about how to learn and grow?
Sure. Bold Blind Beauty had started out just as a solitary blog, just a little blog where I would just write and write and write, take pictures and edit pictures and all the stuff that I didn't know anything about. I took some online courses on, how to set up a website, how to blog, and all that kind of stuff. But it was a constant learning process. And through the years, even the platform I use, which is WordPress, I chose it because it was one of the more accessible platforms. um it's changing, throughout the years. It's constantly changing, and I'm finding it really as I'm getting older, difficult to keep up with some of the rapid advances that are happening, not just with WordPress, but with all the tools that I use, Google and
Mm.
all the different things that I use to keep it alive. But I took it from a blog to then incorporating an online store, um, having an artist design for me a picture that was in my head of a very stylish woman who walks very confidently with a white cane. Her name is Abby. Um, she is the brand icon for Bold Blind Beauty. And I thought, you know, because we are such an image driven society, looking at how things appear, we needed an image that represented what I felt was a positive representation of someone who was confident, um, and accomplished. and still she was blind. She's blind. But it has nothing to do with who she is as a person. She has all these other magnificent qualities about her. She is fictional. So we were able to design a story any way we want to. Um, you know, we we took her in many different directions. Right now she's still on the site in the about section, but we created the Abby's Corner within our newsletter, because that's another new thing that we developed last year. We created a podcast, Bold Blind Beauty on Air, and AIR stands for Access, Inclusion, and
I
Representation.
love it.
Because we believe, or we know it's a fact, everybody on the planet needs air to survive. Everyone does. Without it, we're gone. Okay.
Mm.
People with disabilities need air, access, inclusion, and representation, not only to survive, but to thrive. And it's not like when you provide somebody who has a disability access and accessibility, it's not like you're giving them a gift or you're doing them a favor. It is something that helps them to be the best that they can possibly be, because let's face it, this world was not designed for people with disabilities. It's almost like people with disabilities um don't matter. We don't add value, and we know that that's not true. Of course we add value, and disabilities are part of the human experience. So why aren't we in a place where we are doing better to create greater access, and creating inclusion and representation? Yesterday, I watched a video of a sorority, like initiation or whatever. I'm not familiar with them because I never was part of one.
Mm.
And I thought it was a great presentation, but immediately the first thing I noticed was I could not see anybody with a visible disability as part of that team. And that broke my heart, because that's something that needs to change. Inclusion isn't just about race, religion, age, um, uh, sexual orientation. It's none of those things that would set us apart. Inclusion is about, it's everything. It's everything. And it means embracing people where they are, embracing them as they are.
Really, so great to hear you say that and frame it in such a clear way. I'm thinking about your actual blog and how that has evolved into some, I'm going to call them spin-offs. That there's the brilliantly titled Kane Enabled, which
Yes.
just, it's, I mean, you got me with the acronym AIR, and then you took it to Kane Enabled, and that's CANE, like a cane, and enabled. It's just brilliant. Um, you got monthly beauties, and you've also got men in motion. That there's a stereotype
Yes.
of beauty only being for
Applicable to women. Yeah.
yeah. So that inclusion that you speak of is definitely all inclusive.
Right. It's across the board, because, and that's funny about the men, because I did have one guy approach me a couple years ago, and he's like, "Hey, Steph, you know, no problem. You know, being related to beauty, or being called a beauty, or whatever, however he worded it. I know I'm messing it up." And he's like, "Have you ever considered featuring a guy? I would love to be featured." And we actually did feature him. He's actually from Australia. Beautiful person, Matt. He's just awesome, awesome young man. And thank you, Matt.
That's great. Since launch, your site has, I think, exploded is the right word in the most positive sense, as far as viewership goes and hits, so to speak. That you've really tapped into something for both blind people and for sighted people, and it's so great to see. Is there something about what is happening now on Bold Blind Beauty that is satisfying that mission that you set out for? I know you still have some really specific directions you want to take Bold Blind Beauty, but are there moments where you just sit back and say, "Yeah, this this is doing what I intended to, and a sense of
Yes,
yeah.
definitely. We recently hosted a webinar in May, and at the end of it, during the Q&A, a woman piped up with a question, a remark, and then a question. And she was saying that she newly lost her sight. Um, she appeared to be a woman who was middle age. And she said, I would love to be able to create a cover letter, resume, and all that kind of stuff. She said, but I'm really struggling. And she said, every time I began talking about my sight loss, I start crying. And she asked the question, is it normal to feel this way? And of course, we all piped up. And what that said to me, because I had just told my team the day before, because we didn't get as many registrations as we had hoped.
Mm.
However, I told them it doesn't matter if we get one person whom we are able to impact. That's all that matters. And we bring our best. That woman was our one person. And everybody on our team reached out to her and offered themselves to her to help her through this process of sight loss. And that to me always brings me back to, you know, when I first created the site, if I could just change one person's life, then it's worth it. And I think we've done it. I know we've done it because I get messages from so many people, especially people who are struggling with using the white cane because of the stigma that's attached to it. You know, we don't, um, at least most of us don't think twice about people who are wearing eyeglasses. I know when I was young, I was made fun of for wearing eyeglasses, but eyeglasses are a tool to help people to see better. The same can be said for the white cane, a wheelchair, braces, crutches, um, anything that helps a person to be able to achieve whatever it is that they want to achieve in their life, to enhance their life, to live their life.
Even going to the website right now, you've got three very prominent and bold cane enabled people on the front. All just there's such a beautiful confidence there.
Yes, I love those pictures. Every time I look at those pictures of those people, it really gives me chills because you can see the confidence, the pride, the acceptance, living in a world that doesn't hold a whole lot of value for people who are different, especially people who have disabilities. When you see someone be able to do that, to fully embrace themselves wholly, it's powerful.
Hmm. Steph, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
Sure. I would just like to encourage your audience, as I said earlier, when we started, to give people a chance to try to resist the urge to jump to a conclusion and say the first thing that pops into your head when you come across someone who is different. Try to instead embrace them, try to learn from them, listen. I think we can learn a lot from others simply by shutting our mouth and opening our ears and our heart.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How can we follow you? Social media, obviously website, the boldblindbeauty.com. Anything else that you'd like to share?
Yes. Bold Blind Beauty on Air podcast can be found on all the major podcast platforms. And we're also on YouTube as well, Bold Blind Beauty, um, Facebook and Instagram, Bold Blind Beauty.
Thanks again for joining us, Steph. This is great.
Thank you, Roy.